Hi everyone, it's me, Arden Lee, and I thought I would come on and make a video today because I want to talk a little bit more about hypersigils. Now, I have a video on hypersigils already, so if you haven't yet seen that one, that might be helpful before watching this one, so you can look on my channel. It's called What is a Hypersigil? And the TLDR of that is that a hypersigil is a work of narrative magic where we use storytelling and elements of drama, plot, and characterization in order to essentially write the story that we want to come true, right? So we are writing a story with magical intent in order to alter reality in accordance with our will and intent given what we're writing in the story, right? And for me, my band, Arden and the Wolves, is a vehicle through which I can use my songwriting to alter my reality in accordance with my intent. And I've done this before, I've done it publicly, I've reported on some of those results, and this is also something that I teach. And by the way, if you're interested in that, I am beginning my workshop Myths and Magic this coming Sunday, October 23rd, 2022. That's only 2 days from today. I was gonna make this video a little earlier so I could have a little more time to talk about the class, but I didn't, but here we are. But if you're watching this and it is either Sunday or even if it's a couple days after Sunday, I'll have the replay also up in the group, so you'll still be able to access it even if you want to join it a couple days late. So if you're interested in the Myths and Magic course that I teach that deals in narrative magic and using narrative magic and archetype in order to alter and transform yourself and your reality, do feel free to reach out to me. So I want to talk today actually about hypersigils, but what I want to do is I want to talk about what happens when you start writing things, right? Because I'm also, a musician just for the sake of being a musician too, So what happens when you start writing songs, as I have done quite a bit this past year, as I've been quite active as a songwriter and as a performer? What happens when you start writing songs and they start coming true, even if you didn't necessarily intend them as an act of magic? And I don't really have a solid answer for this one yet, you guys. I kind of wanted to make this video as a way of opening the discussion because I think it's an interesting thing to think about. And I think as a creator, it's responsible. It's only responsible for me to think about, like, if I am writing things and I start seeing them come true, right? Then for me, I think responsible creatorship involves examining that and making sure that if that is a power that I now seem to be wielding, even without necessarily always being aware of the impact that it can have, then that's something that I need to bring out of shadow and realize that I do have a certain power around, right? If I'm gonna write things and there is a pattern where those things start coming true, even if I didn't write a song specifically as an act of magic with intent, I'm still, I still feel personally that I at least need to examine that a little bit. So that's kind of the question of today's video is what happens if, as a creator, you start writing things and they start coming true, right? Is that magic or is it not magic? Does magic require intent to be magic? Or can you become a person who perhaps, let's say, like, just by over the course of me teaching about hypersigils, talking about hypersigils, and essentially declaring over and over again that my band, Arden and the Wolves, is a vehicle through which I can alter my reality? Well, if that starts happening, my opinion is that I'm responsible for at least examining that, right? And examining that power and making sure that that I'm responsible for my impact with it, right? So there's some differing opinions on this in the magic community, and specifically, I was very lucky that I got to see my teacher last month when they were here to promote their new book, Luda. My teacher, Grant Morrison, by the way, has this amazing novel out. It is called Luda. And that was an interesting question too, because that novel also is about a magician and apprentice relationship. And I have not fully read it. I'm still working my way through a lot of the curriculum that Grant has assigned me. So I can't yet comment on the novel itself. I'm looking forward to being able to do that. But definitely, definitely it caught my attention when I realized that my teacher had written a book specifically about a magician apprentice relationship, especially since I am their apprentice. And so I kind of brought this up and I said, hey, I saw you on the Seth Meyers show, and you were telling Seth about how this book is about a magician and apprentice relationship that ultimately goes badly. And Grant was like, well, yeah, but that's the book. That's not us, and I said, well, wait a minute, hang on, because when you wrote The Invisibles, did you intend to, say, end up in the hospital with a busted lung, right? Grant tells this story very publicly about how when they were writing The Invisibles and they had, their main character essentially functioning as an avatar for themselves in the comic, one of the things that they wrote into the comic was that the character ends up in the hospital with a busted lung. And then sure enough, Grant ended up in the hospital with a busted lung, right? And then they reported that when they got out of the hospital, they were like, well, why don't I give him an easy thing next? Why don't I, get him laid? And so they wrote this girlfriend character into the comic, right? And then all these girls who resemble the girl in the comic, the sexy girl with the red hair, like start turning up in their life. And they're like, oh, but wait, we're not getting along well. Maybe I've asked for the wrong things, right? I'm dealing with all of these really beautiful redheaded women in my life, but we're there's drama and we're fighting all the time. And that's sort of how they summed it up when they spoke about that experience, right? And Grant's response to that was sort of like, well, you might be right, and maybe you'll play with this technology more, and maybe you'll discover something that that is maybe not like basically we don't have to be in agreement about everything all the time, right? So Grant's position was that magic requires intent, and if there isn't intent in a story or a song that you're writing, and that story or song ends up coming true, that is not necessarily an unintentional act of magic, but rather that is essentially the artist dipping a toe into the eternal river of consciousness, right? I'm trying to express this as beautifully as Grant put it. Grant put it in this really gorgeous way. The sense that like all time is happening at once, and if past, present, and future are all, essentially in the fifth dimension, if there is no time, right? Because all time is present, then what the artist is doing is not so much, or basically I asked, so is it precognition or is it creating, right? Is it that it's already going to happen and we're sensing that it's going to happen, or is it that we are creating it as we go? And Grant's answer is both. It's both. We are creating, we are foreseeing, and all time is happening at once, and so we are dipping a toe into that river of consciousness. And that what the artist brings through then is the ability to essentially dip into that reality, where that fifth dimensional reality where all time is present, everything is happening at once. So that time here is an illusion, and so it seems as though we've created this song that either foresees or predicts or creates or all of the above, this future reality that then happens, right? But Grant was pretty adamant about me not blaming myself for it, right? Because there were some things that I wrote about this year that I did not intend to come true, that I had intended these songs mostly as being emotional purges for myself to process some things that had happened that I was not super happy about. And then some of the things that I had written about in some of those songs also came true, which was pretty harrowing, right? And then on top of that, there were some songs also that I had written as pure fiction, right? Because as I'm working on my music career, and those of you who've been following these videos may know that just about this time last year, I made a deal at the crossroads with Hermes, the Greek god of communication, among many other things, for success in music. And indeed, this past year, I have done more collaborations. I've worked on a lot more music than I have at any time previous to this, which has been wonderful and exciting. But that also means that if I'm working on songs, I want to be able to just write about things that are fictional, so I can write a song that just happens to be good for, say a collaboration between me and another artist, right? Or happens to be about a topic that I think is cool or would be fun to write about. So I ended up writing some songs that really weren't supposed to be about anything in my own life. And then those songs ended up showing up in my real life quite uncannily. And so my question when Grant visited was, essentially, how much of this is magic happening? How much am I responsible for? And Grant was pretty adamant that they believed that this was not something that I should blame myself for. And I'm not trying to use language around blame either, right? And Grant and I also met up that same weekend with Rodney Orpheus, who is also an amazing magician in his own right, who is one of the chaos magicians who is really in that scene in Northern England when chaos magic in the 70s and 80s was really just getting its start in that sort of nexus where the original kind of chaos magic zines and texts were being written and passed around. And so I was really grateful to also get his opinion. And Rodney's opinion on this was even perhaps more extreme. And I hope that I'm conveying this correctly. Because definitely when you're around people like Grant and Rodney at a lunch together and they're saying such brilliant things all the time, it's a lot for your brain to be able to hold and then be able to regurgitate for a video. So I hope I'm getting this right. But Rodney essentially said that almost all cause and effect is an illusion, right? That almost everything, and naturally, this is something that I agree with to a certain extent, because essentially what Rodney is saying is we create so many backwards rationalizations for things in our minds, right? We're going to do what we want to do anyway. And then we think, oh, well, it's because, this, or it's because that, right? And as the creator of the Repatterning Project, I certainly believe this and I teach it as well. Again, to an extent, right? Or at the very least, we don't necessarily always consciously understand the real underlying cause for why we do things, right? And according to Rodney, and again, I hope I'm interpreting this correctly. So when Rodney says, basically there almost is no such thing as cause and effect, I'm not sure how literally he means that. It's possible that, I'm autistic, so it's possible that I'm interpreting it very literally and thinking so I was like, wow, well, if there's no such thing as cause and effect at all, then why do magic, right? Because we do magic to have an effect on things. I'm not sure if that's exactly what Rodney was saying, but basically both Rodney and Grant kind of came back and said well, we think that the reason that you're taking on all this responsibility for the fact that you've written these songs and then stuff has happened, we think that's more attributable to your Catholic upbringing than that actually being part of magic. And again, that idea that magic requires intent to be magic. That if you are going to do something that you consider magic, that putting intent into it, the intent to change reality, has to be a part of that magic, right? So for me, I'm if I notice a pattern, right? Even if it wasn't magic, even if we're gonna, say well, maybe that was not a deliberate act of magic that I did. But if I notice my songs coming true, do I not have a responsibility to then write about the things that I want to happen, right? I can't complain about what I'm doing, right? If I'm writing about things and they're coming true, I can't complain. If I notice that pattern, once I've noticed it, I can't really complain about oh, I wrote something and then it came true again. At that point, I feel like it's on me to change what I'm writing if I want to see a different result, right? And that's not about blame. It's not even really necessarily about accountability. Really? I mean, maybe it is a little, I don't know. I'm making this video because I'm still obviously thinking a lot about this, right? But basically, yeah, I'm I don't want to complain about what I'm creating now that I know that there is a pattern of what I'm creating coming to pass. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But then the very next day after I had lunch with Grant and Rodney, And I will also admit that Grant and Rodney have a really good point about my Catholic upbringing. And I've made some music recently that is a little more spiritual, religious, and it came out like so Catholic sounding. I'm really excited. I'm going to be releasing it for the holidays. So yeah, follow along on whatever platform you listen to music on if you're interested in hearing how unconsciously Catholic I apparently sounded. And so I've been really actually kind of embracing that idea that perhaps my Catholic patterning is stronger in me than I had realized, and that's okay, and that as a chaos magician I can embrace the parts of Catholicism that perhaps are helpful to me and reject the parts that are harmful, right? So I will admit they probably also have a point, seeing as I am observing that my Catholic upbringing is more present in me and my patterning than I had perhaps given credence to before. When I made the song, I was like, wow, that sounds really Catholic. Maybe they're right about that. But interestingly enough, the very next day after I had lunch with Grant and Rodney, this article came out in The Guardian, and it's an excerpt from a new book of interviews, of conversations, I should say, between Nick Cave, the musician, and Sean O'Hagan. And there was an excerpt in The Guardian, and if you want to look it up, it's called, I believe it's called "Songs Are Dangerous Little Bombs of Truth," is basically the quote that Nick Cave said. And he talks about his album, The Skeleton Tree, and how it really eerily foretold some of the details of the death of his son, Arthur, and how kind of spooked he and his wife were, and how many people thought, oh, you've written this album about the death of your son. And he was like, no, actually I wrote it and then it happened. And how the death of his son also opened him up to, as he calls it, more magical thinking, a more connection to spirituality, which he says even if it's even if it's not real, that it is benevolent and perhaps even necessary in those times of grief, right? So then I thought about it and I was like, well, I would never in a million years blame Nick Cave for being responsible for the death of his son, right? Never in a million years would I be like, oh, well, you wrote that album, so clearly, you're responsible for your pattern, right? That is not something I would ever do to a grieving parent, right? Who would ever wish that? So why would I also blame myself for writing something and then seeing it come true? And so I've been just really sitting with this question of whether magic requires intent to be magic, right? Or intent to work or to be considered magic, or however you want to call that. And so I also got an opportunity to speak to Jason Miller, who I really enjoy and respect as a teacher. And he is the author of a number of magic books, including Consorting with Spirits, Protection and Reversal Magic, and Financial Sorcery. Those are the three that I own anyway, and he teaches a number of courses. And so I asked Jason's opinion. I basically said, hey, here's what Grant and Rodney said, and here's this Nick Cave article, and here's what happened to me. Like, what is your opinion on this? And Jason basically said, magic requires intent ... until it doesn't. And Jason told a story basically about how there was a time that he was practicing an incantation, which he said he wasn't delivering with any magical intent. I think he was just practicing it for a ritual, or perhaps to memorize it or something like that. And then gets a call from his partner who's like, hey, whatever you're doing, can you whatever you're invoking, can you come back and banish, the spirits that are here or whatever. So Jason basically relayed that as a story, as a way of being like, yeah, I had no intention of actually doing an invocation, but clearly by saying the words, I had kicked up something. And so, yeah, so magic requires intent to work until it doesn't. Which again, that's a pretty blurry line, right? So it's a really interesting thing to think about. So anyway, that's what I wanted to share in this video. Again, I don't think this is a question that I necessarily will answer to my own satisfaction, perhaps even in my lifetime. But I will say that if I do notice a pattern, if I'm writing things and they're coming true, and if I want to change that, right, well, then me changing what I'm writing would be the factor that would change the outcome, right? If we are thinking in that magical thinking kind of way, what other way can you really think if you keep noticing those things happening, right? This is not something I'm making up. This is something I'm seeing happen quite uncannily in my reality. So I did change, by the way. I changed some of what I was writing about. I changed the arc of some of my narratives going forward in my songwriting, and I did see also a positive change, which is also pretty interesting to add to the pile of evidence. So yeah. So anyway, that's what I wanted to write about or wanted to talk about today. And again, the Myths and Magic Fall 2022 course starts this Sunday, October 23rd. If you're watching this video and it's past then, I teach it every 6 months, so check back in the spring or again in the fall, depending on when you're watching. And yeah, reach out to me for more information if that's something that you feel like you want to join, or if you have more questions about it. And yeah, that's about it. Hopefully this was an interesting discussion. Leave me your thoughts in the comments. What do you think? Is magic, does it require intent to be magic? What happens if we write about things without intent and then they come true? Are we responsible for that? I don't know, man. It's a good question. But anyway, I hope this was a fun video and I'll see you next time.